special edition of the interview. Thanks for joining us. Today with Donald Kaberuka, Chairman and Partner of Southbridge Group, we will look at the challenges of making intra-African trade a reality. Mr. Kaberuka, welcome to Africa 24 English.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. In collaboration with AfCFTA Secretariat and the AU, Afreximbank has set up a $10 billion adjustment fund to help countries participate effectively in the AfCFTA. At the end of December 2023, the bank's total assets and guarantees amounted to approximately $37 billion US. In your opinion, what is the next step to be taken to make this free trade area a reality?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to commend the bank for what they're doing to promote intra-African trade, which, as you know, requires several angles, not just financing. I think the contribution the bank is making is just beyond financing. You know, things which hamper trade fall around the areas of policy, financing, and the political will to make things happen. I think the next stage is payment systems to be able to settle trade in our respective currencies, with the bank at the end settling the difference in convertible currencies. It is extremely important. So payment systems. Second, movement of people. Third, the Yamoussoukro Agreement, which will reduce the cost of aviation on the continent. And fourthly, in my view, some action around non-tariff restrictions which still remain a big blockage. So there is financing, there is policy on payment systems, movement of people, bringing down the cost of aviation, and then non-tariff restrictions. And in all this, I think the bank is quite active.
That's good to know. In the context where African and Caribbean countries are struggling to trade with each other at the regional level, what are the stakes of these 2024 annual meetings for both regions?
As you know, the Caribbean region is often called the sixth region of Africa. Because in the African Union, we have got 5 regions. So the Caribbean is often called the sixth region. Because there is a will on both sides to increase contact in peoples, business persons, tourists. And I do believe that exactly as in the African region, we need to remove those restrictions which have been hampering trade. And in this case, I think financial intermediation is the most important. I'm told, for example, that some Egyptian business people have been trying to set up resorts in this region. Because the Caribbean is revenues from tourism are quite high. Here in the Bahamas, I'm told they receive about 1 million people per year. So probably the cooperation will begin around everything that facilitates tourism services.
All right. And these annual meetings aim to propose concrete measures to mobilize resources for Africa's structural transformation. In your opinion, what are the sectors in which there is an urgent need to invest in order to transform Africa?
Everything. Everything. But I do believe that the way to look around it is to look around the current global supply chains. During COVID, we realized that the global supply chains have to be de-risked. It's very difficult to rely on a few areas of production. So both the Caribbean and Africa, we need to look at the global supply chains and figure out at what point can we be part of it. And those ranging from pharmaceuticals to agribusiness to industrial production and all this. So I think it's important to study supply chains carefully, to look at where we can be part of the de-risking process from reliance on the lowest cost of production to the most reliable cost of production. And I think Africa and the Caribbean are well placed, especially the Caribbean because of where it is located, next to the world's largest market, which is the North American space.
According to some experts, if African countries were able to fully monetize the carbon sequestration service, it would have earned around $10 billion a year by 2030. What mechanism can African countries use to become self-sufficient in energy while at the same time benefiting from their resources?
No, so there are several angles to this problem. There's carbon sequestration, but there is also providing energy to 800 million people who have no access to energy. And the continent has enough renewables to provide energy to our people. So that is the first thing we have to do. Now, is how the carbon market works to compensate us for the sequestration. That is work in progress. Up to now, all the initiatives, whether public-driven or private markets, have not worked very well. And so we hope and expect that as time goes, the carbon markets will work much better to be able to compensate us for the sequestration of carbon, whether it's tropical forests or many other things we do in that respect. But for now, the carbon markets are not working very well, not just for Africa, around the world.
Well, despite the structural challenges and severe shocks facing African countries, the economic outlook is kind of positive. Growth is expected to reach 3.7% in 2024, underlining the resilience of African economies. How can Africa's resilience be an advantage in this context of global financial reform?
No, 3.7% is not resilience. 3.7% shows you the volatility of our economic growth. The most important thing in the economic growth is not a particular number. It is the consistency of a number we need to bypass demographic increase. I'll give an example. So if you have 3.7% real GDP growth, it means you're basically barely growing above population increase. That's not resilience. I think resilience for me would be growth anywhere above 7%, and that should be consistent over a long period of time, not volatile. So if you grow at 7%, say for 10 years, consistently, you can hope and expect to double your economy in about 10 years. So 3.7% is not resilience. I think it shows the volatility of our economies, partly because of domestic policies, but in large part because of external shocks of the last few years.
Well, talking about external shocks, Afreximbank and the AfCFTA Secretariat signed an agreement on February 2022 to manage the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund to support countries that have suffered losses as a result of the reduction or elimination of their tariffs. What is your assessment of this process?
So it's a good thing that the fund exists, but in my view, it is not the most important thing. Because when you increase trade among ourselves, it is not a zero-sum game. It is not that all of us must gain at the same time immediately. Okay? But in the long run, we all gain, we all win. So there will be some short-term losses because particular sectors adjust to greater trade. And the fund exists as a shock absorber to those short-term losses. But I think we need to keep our eyes fixed on the long-term gains, which are inevitable for all sides. So these kind of funds help in the short run, but they're never enough, all right? If there's not political will to say, look, we shall all gain from increasing our trade, rather than making a short-term calculus of how much do I lose here, how much do you gain here? Because you may lose in some sectors, gain in other sectors. You may lose in the short term, but the long term you're actually going to gain quite a lot. So I welcome the creation of the fund. It is helpful, but I think we need to do more than just create a fund.
So can we then be optimistic for the future generations or not?
Oh, we have to be. We have to be. I think that all countries in the world were poor at some point, and they overcame poverty by trade and investment, access to capital markets. And in parts of Africa, by the way, we're getting quite close. In the East African region, for example, intra-African trade is now almost close to 24%, which is quite a good number, comparable to some of the regions, the ASEAN area. It's not 60% of the European region, but it is not the 4% that I often hear being quoted. Now, there's some parts of Africa, like North Africa, like Central Africa, where we need to make a big effort. But I think in the ECOWAS region, until recently, in the South African region, to an extent in the SADC area as well, some good progress were underway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaberuka, for answering Africa 24's English questions.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
It was really a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for watching this interview. Please stay tuned to our programs.